All right, maybe we can get started. I'm Terry Moran, and it is a great pleasure for me to welcome all of you to A Transfusion of Hope, a conversation among newer and older activists. And as you know, this is the inaugural event of the Daniel Berrigan Collective for Contemplation, Community, and Resistance. And I'd like to say a little bit about the collective before we launch into this evening's event. Dan's friend and mentor, Dorothy Day, always used to say that the Catholic worker started from people sitting around and talking. And the Dan Berrigan Collective also started in that same way, from people sitting around and talking. A group of us, myself, Anna Brown, Dan Kosaki, Colleen Dully, and Eric Martin, we're talking about possible ways to honor Dan in this, the 100th year anniversary of his birth. Some of you might remember we had at a point earlier in the year some Zoom conversations with likely co-conspirators to hear their ideas about what they might like such an organization to look like. And the Daniel Berrigan Collective is what we came up with. So I'd like to begin by asking Eric, is he there, to read our mission statement, to give you an idea of what the collective is all about. So Eric, if you could unmute yourself and do that.
Sure. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
So we'll promote the person, thought, and legacy of activism of Daniel Berrigan, one that comes out of the tradition promoted by Berrigan, in which contemplation, reflection, and study flow into and from community, activism, and resistance. It will provide a space for dialogue between the writings of Daniel Berrigan and contemporary communities of resistance that share his concerns and expand on them. One that hopes to center the experiences and concerns of women, people of color, younger folks, LGBTQ+ people, immigrants, the incarcerated, and those who have difficulty finding a voice in academic and religious and social institutions, and one that will be accessible as possible and use a variety of media, including writing, art, music, poetry, celebrations, and social media.
Thank you, Eric. As you probably know, our official launch date was November 18th, a couple of weeks ago. We chose that date because it was the date of the beginning of that famous Peacemakers Retreat in the Trappist Abbey of Gethsemane, hosted by Thomas Merton and attended by Dan and Phil Berrigan and a number of other notable peacemakers. We chose that date because it kind of symbolizes the integration of contemplation, community, and resistance that Dan gave his life to. But we also chose it because of its deficiencies. That gathering was all male, it was all white, it was all people from the global north. And so acknowledging that expresses our desire that whatever our collective turns out to be, we want it to be part of a much more diverse, beloved community. And of course, we're very aware that today, when we have this webinar, is the 41st anniversary of the death of the churchwomen of El Salvador, an astoundingly luminous witness that heartens and enlightens us to this day. If you already haven't checked out our website, please do. Colleen put the link in the chat. We're very convinced that the Daniel Berrigan Collective is not this small group, but all of you, all of us. So we invite you to check out what we have in mind and think of ways in which you might join in. So our first inaugural event this evening is A Transfusion of Hope, a conversation among newer and older activists. Those of us who are on the older activist side of the bar often bemoan the fact that younger people don't seem to be attracted to the traditional resistance movements that Dan Berrigan was a part of, for example. But we all know that vibrant activism exists in so many ways, marvelous ways, among younger people. So one of our aims is to bring that rich tradition that Dan represents into contact with new energy and different perspectives. So we hope in this Zoom to host just such a conversation. We'll hear from and dialogue with two young activists, Grace and Claire, about the inspiration they receive and the limitations they perceive in the tradition of Catholic radicalism to which Dan belongs. The title for our gathering comes from some words of Dan's in those beautiful renditions of some of the Psalms he did. Dan writes, "Look, a transfusion of hope in every human vein, youthful or aged. I name you, therefore, those who hope in Yahweh. And I promise, youth, elders, you will be no more earthbound than eagles are." So let's be inspired by Dan's words and try to soar in hope a little bit this evening. So I invite Anna Brown, who's one of the founding members of the collective and the head of the political science department at St. Peter's University in Jersey City, and a member of the Kairos community and a friend of Dan's, to lead us in an opening prayer.
Thank you, Terry. So first, perhaps we can start by just centering ourselves, by breathing deeply, by opening our hearts. In light of the martyrdom of the 4 church women that Terry mentioned, I thought I would read a bit for our prayer from an essay that Dan wrote on Archbishop Romero, the 4 church women, and the Jesuit martyrs of El Salvador. At the end of the reading, I will say the name of each woman. And when I say each woman's name, if we could all say presente after her name. So for our prayer this evening, we do well to look to the martyrs for a measure of light, for the vision they offer, a way of being human in an inhuman time. Let us not hesitate to invoke the martyrs. They preferred living acts to dead symbols. For this, we honor them. They risked death at the hands of the violent rather than compromising and pussyfooting. For this, we honor them. They refuse to live as functionaries of super church or super state. For this, we honor them. They named God and stood by that name and withstood for God's sake. For this, we honor them. They named the idols for our sake also. For this, we honor them. They endured in a tranquil spirit contempt from Christians and others, oligarchs, bishops, politicians. For this, we honor them. They refused to separate peace from justice. For this, we honor them. They died for others, and in the words of Romero, they arise from death in the Salvadoran people. For this, we honor them. Maura Clark, present.
Presente.
Ida Ford,
Presente.
Jean Donovan,
Presente.
Dorothy Hazel.
Presente.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. So I invite Colleen to introduce herself and our two presenters for the evening.
Thank you for that beautiful prayer, Anna. Our presenters for the evening are Grace, and I'm sorry, Grace, I should have asked you how to say your last name. Is it Aheron?
It's Aheron, but it's spelled
Aheron.
it
I'm
really
so sorry.
differently, so no worries at all.
Grace Aheron is a multiracial Asian American Southern queer femme. She was raised upper middle class in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in southwestern Virginia. She was politicized in her progressive Christian church that planted a commitment to liberation theology and justice deep in her heart as a wee one. She helped to start the Showing Up for Racial Justice chapter in Charlottesville in 2016 and made it her political home as they survived and thrived through the Unite the Right rally in 2017. She's married to a remarkable queer and they live in Virginia on traditional Monacan territory. And Claire Hitchens is called to tend sacred spaces where connection, healing, imagination, and justice making become possible. In 2014, she first named this vocation as a call to priesthood, but as a young Catholic woman, she couldn't imagine what that could mean. Her winding discernment path led her to the fertile fringes of the institutional church, where she seeds transformation with fellow Catholic changemakers. She is blessed to design and direct Regeneration, a mentoring and leadership program connecting young progressive Catholics with each other and with elders to support them in their work for justice in the church. She is a resident of Casa Alma Catholic Worker in Charlottesville, Virginia, where she supports community projects in sustainable agriculture and radical hospitality. Claire weaves music into her ministry wherever possible, leading group singing at church services, retreats, protests, and rallies. She is a second-year Master of Divinity candidate at Vanderbilt Divinity School, where she's widening her imagination around how churches and faith leaders can resist oppressive systems and theologies and better serve the healing, repair, and liberation for which all creation groans. Claire received her BA in Religious Studies from the University of Virginia in 2013 and served with Jesuit Volunteer Corps Northwest from 2015 to 2016. And our moderator tonight is Dan Kosacci, who is an assistant professor of religious studies and director of the Justice and Peace Studies program at Marywood University in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And with Eric Martin, he is co-editor of the Berrigan Letters, personal correspondence between Daniel and Philip Berrigan, which was published by Orbis in 2016.
Well, thank you very much, Colleen. And Colleen is responsible for much of the advertising for this event. So, and all the technological savviness and everything like that. So we probably wouldn't be here without you, Colleen. So thank you very much. This is great. And thanks so much to all of you for joining us. This is a real pleasure for me. I'm going to try to do as little speaking as possible, just try to keep us on time. I've got a few questions, but the one thing I want to say up front is we're really looking forward to input from everybody who's taking part in this event. So if you have a question that comes to your mind as we're speaking, feel free to put it into the chat box. Or if you'd prefer to wait until after sort of this first part of the conversation has concluded and voice the question verbally, there'll be plenty of time for that as well. So please feel welcome to do that. That'll just enrich our conversation all the more. What we've agreed to do is start off maybe like half an hour or so, maybe a little bit more with this opening part of the conversation. The first part of it is Grace and Claire are going to have 5 minutes each to just say a few words about connections they've had with Dan in some way, Dan Berrigan in some way, shape, or form, or inspiration that they've taken from his life work in their own activism. So Grace, why don't we start with you since you were introduced first, and just anything that strikes your fancy on that point.
Sure, thanks, Dan. We're gonna flip the script a little bit, and we conferred a bit, and Claire actually wants to go first. So is that okay with you? Okay, we're taking a speaker privilege here. So to Claire.
Well, thanks, guys. Yeah, well, thanks so much for having us and for your hospitality as a collective. I see some names that I recognize in on the Zoom screen here and a lot that I don't. So it's great to meet you all virtually, and I look forward to getting more into conversation soon. But before we get into that, as you heard in my bio, I try to sort of sing whenever I get the chance. So, and usually rope other people into doing it too. So I thought I could start. Grace and I will sing a song together that we've sung so many times in so many places in community. And I really appreciate the opening prayer and honoring the church women in El Salvador, and yeah, just really feel the presence of the cloud of witnesses among us, and invoke that as we lift up this other kind of prayer together and song. So it's competitive, so if you catch it and you're someone that likes to sing, feel free to sing along, but do mute yourself because it can become a real cacophony. So I see, yeah, Father Terry, you got it. Okay. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit.
You don't have to be singing. What?
Spirit draw near. Oh, hey, Bill and Sue. It's so good to see y'all. Oh, Virginia in the house. That was perfect. I'm really glad that you two jumped on just then. Well, thank you for indulging us a song. That's one of those ones that we don't actually know the origin. I try to share a little origin story about a song when I share it, but.
Well, we did learn it from Chad and Elaine in the Bartimaeus cooperative family, who are very much in the lineage of the Berrigans. So,
yeah,
you know, we got it by way of them, by way, you know,
yeah,
it's all in the family.
Someone asked Chad and Elaine where that song comes from. Yeah, so, okay, let's see here. Just as we were singing that, I was recalling an opportunity that Grace and I had in the past couple years to learn about ritual leadership from a really wonderful activist and pastor in the Philly area named Retta Morgan.
Yeah.
Oof, sometimes last names. Yeah, I think about sort of the way in which I feel called to be a ritual leader, and how leading ritual was so much a part of the ministry and activism of Dan Berrigan. And yeah, I just feel, you know, one of the aspects of my Catholic faith, in which, you know, I was born into the Catholic Church and sort of have inherited so much that in some ways is so nourishing and grounding to me, and in other ways is such a heavy weight of grief and confusion, but the ritual inheritance feels like a really deep well of gifts. Yeah, so let's see. I feel, what can I add to what's been shared in my bio about who I am and what I do? A lot of my time goes into and has gone into connecting with other people. I think that's something Grace and I both really love. So these days, a lot of my connecting is happening in what I called the fertile fringes of the Catholic Church, which I feel that you all are a part of. I feel in good company here. And that work is happening for me right now in the context of Call to Action, which is a nonprofit that's been around since Vatican II. Maybe some of y'all are CTA people on the call. I do see Kasha, I know, in the house. Good to see you. Probably others have been to Call to Action conferences over the years. A church reform organization. Oh my gosh, Angie, hi. Oh, that's sweet. Yeah, so at this point, I feel really compelled to be a part of weaving those connections and gathering people together who have been marginalized by the institutional church, but still feel really deeply connected to it and in some way inspired by it in their work for justice in the world. And when I think about what I know about Dan Berrigan, he was absolutely seeding change in the fringes of the Catholic Church and bringing people together in those spaces. So I feel, yeah, just grateful for the space that Dan created, co-created with so many others. And I often think like, there's so many, like, I could not be Catholic if not for some rad nuns, and like, I could not be Catholic if not for the Catholic worker, and I could not still be Catholic. It was sort of a little litany of these things that have made it possible to stay Catholic. And I feel like the space that Dan and so many of his co-conspirators created is one of those really essential pieces of like why I can still be Catholic, and how it can like make sense on any level for me in the world today. I think I'll leave it at that. Have I missed important parts that I should speak
No,
to?
we can get into it.
Okay.
Thanks, Claire. Also, in case it's not obvious, Claire and I have been friends for a long time. And we'll talk about this, I think, in talking about the inspiration of Dan and others of that era. But we are going to be celebrating our 20th friendship anniversary this coming September. So y'all all come down to Charlottesville for our—
It's gonna be a blowout.
Yeah, we're gonna have a big friendship celebration. So if you're sensing familiarity amongst us, you are correct. So for me, I really had the opportunity to reflect. So I'm not Catholic. Also, if you caught my bio, I'm raised Episcopalian, still identify as Episcopalian, a seminary dropout even, and we can talk more about that too. But I was kind of given the gift of being able to reflect on my relationship to the Berrigans and to Stringfellow, and I don't know, just folks kind of in that lineage, Thomas Merton even. Recently, when I was invited to write a piece for G's magazine about the principalities and powers, and reflect on my relationship to these ones who brought this theology of principalities and powers, or who carry this theology of principalities and powers to today. And I sort of confessed my journey with these monk bros, as I like to call them lovingly. And the journey was one kind of from dismissal to then maybe some like skepticism and suspicion, to eventual acceptance of Dan and others into my own pantheon of saints and folks that I draw upon in my own spiritual practices. And maybe some of you have read the article or heard my toast at Bill Wiley Kellerman's book kickoff, where he was celebrating his publication of his lovely anthology about Dan and some of his writings. But I wanted to this panel has given me a chance to reflect even further on my journey with these white dudes of the past, radical white dudes of the past, and why I claim them as my own, because I'm not a white dude. Yeah, so in college, for the first time, I was encountering queer and feminist Christian thinkers, and Black women and womanist theologians, and communist Chilean sex workers who were writing about Jesus, and Dalit liberation theology. Just these folks who were preaching from the margins of society and who spoke about God with this familiarity that made it so clear to me how people on the margins create an intimacy with God that can so often be obscured by privilege or by the church, you know, for being honest. And it was so powerful and important for me to be encountering interpretations of God from people who were like me, or who didn't at least look like the priests that I was raised around in my church. And it really shaped how I understood who God was. God became this, like, or was allowed to be for me, this unruly and sumptuous and bright, big, even sexy being. And it set me free to be a Christian in a new way, and sanctified me in a new way as well, honestly. And it was kind of right after this liberation theology awakening in college that I encountered Dan Berrigan and the Monk Bros through folks that had been mentored by them, some of whom are even on this call. And, you know, as I said, when I wrote that piece about G's, I know, as I was encountering, you know, Dan Berrigan and his writing for the first time, I know that I like rolled my eyes or kind of like looked down my nose at this cadre of middle-aged white dudes talking about the anti-war protests of yesteryear. And I just thought to myself, what on earth could these people possibly teach me that I couldn't learn better from someone else? And yet, in spite of myself, you know, as they say, look at God, I couldn't tear myself away from those communities. And I couldn't, if I was being completely honest with myself, deny the fact that the way that these guys spoke about sacrament and scripture made my heart set on fire and burn a little brighter. And as I fell into closer step with these radical disciples, these folks who drew lineages directly from the Berrigans and Stringfellow and Merton, et cetera, there was no denying to me that they had something that I wanted. I saw in their lives that they lived their faith in a way that I wanted to also. And don't be fooled, I still roll my eyes and, you know, poke fun and elbow, but with perhaps a newfound respect. And in learning about these Christian radical giants of the past, and in kind of reckoning with them in who I am, like a queer Asian American woman in 2021, what I learned, or what I kind of realized, was that I needed to figure it out for myself. Like I needed to figure out who Dan Berrigan could be for me on my own terms, like not who he was to Ched Myers or to Bill, people who he mentored directly, or even to my friend Kateri and Eric, who are my peers who have done their own grappling with this tradition. I really wanted to do the work of finding out who Dan could be for me and who I am today. And this work of locating myself in Dan's lineage is, you know, different and maybe a little harder than the other folks that I draw on in my spiritual practices or spiritual mentors, you know, like Grace Lee Boggs or Ella Baker or Ann Braden, women who I have a lot more in common with, or obviously in common with, I guess, than Dan. But I committed to deepening my relationship with Dan on my own terms, reading his words and hearing his stories and making my own conclusions beyond what others had told me, people who were in my life. And, you know, of course, like everyone, I treasure his poetic wisdom and his heart on fire for Jesus, you know, his little sneaky humor, or not so sneaky all the time, the way that he modeled beloved friendship. And in my looking deeper, I found that there were these like special jewels of who he was and how he was witnessing in the world that felt like they were made just for me to read today. Because what I knew about Dan at first was that he was a war resistor and a peace activist. But what I found when I looked a little bit deeper and when I looked for myself was I found someone who so obviously deeply loved queer people. Someone who sat with dying AIDS victims, who many of whom I'm sure were people of color, because that was who was predominantly affected by the AIDS crisis, even if that's not what the news or what the story tells us. And I found someone who not only loved queer people, but befriended them and counted their theological insights as among the most critically important at that time. And this was, of course, at a time when queer people were among society's greatest pariahs. And I also found someone who wasn't just, unilaterally anti-war or a peace activist, but someone who was in deep relationship of love and solidarity with Asian people in Vietnam and Southeast Asia. At a time, of course, when, anti-Asian political rhetoric painted Asian people as communist contagions or as dirty foreigners. It was so obvious in his writing that Dan saw Asian people as human and counted their cultural practices, or honored their cultural practices, saw the brilliance in the political strategy of Asian people. I just saw that he didn't want to just stop the war for stopping the war's sake. He wanted Asian people to no longer be treated as disposable, and he saw them as co-conspirators in that work. So no one told me these things specifically about Dan Berrigan, but it was such a special practice to get to find that on my own as I got to know him through his writing and when I just recommitted to re-meeting him. And I'll close by saying in Bill Wiley Kellerman's book, in writing about his relationship with Dan, he talks about the kind of people whose humanity provokes our own. And when I think about how I just couldn't quit these white dudes who were talking about how great the Berrigans were with their just, and I was getting I couldn't quit them with their annoyingly poignant Bible studies and their veneration of elders that I really just, in spite of myself, loved. Just in spite of my own preconceived notions, Dan and his friends really inhabited this particular kind of humanity that invoked my own humanity in a particular and special way. And I don't know that I would have come to that conclusion if I hadn't turned back towards him, perhaps with a bit more maturity and grace than I did in my early 20s. And I'm grateful for the work of rebuilding our relationship. And I like to think that Dan's grateful for that work too.
Well, thank you so much. That was so incredibly rich. And I just want to give voice to what people are saying in the chat. That was such a moving hymn that you shared with us. And thanks to Ellen for giving the attribution there to Philip A. Porter from the Unitarian Universalist Hymnal. I'm looking over my questions here and I realize that you both touched on some of these, but maybe I'll sort of mash a couple of these together. You both, just going off of that phrase you used, beloved friendship, Grace, and clearly you and Claire are both very close friends, as you mentioned. That is obviously a major similarity that sort of this quote unquote younger generation of activists share with the quote unquote older generation of activists. Dan, got into the Catonsville action because of his being best friends with his brother Phil, and Phil talking him into it. The friendship of Dorothy Day, Thomas Merton, the community of the Kairos community, Catholic worker community, other peace communities. So maybe if you could talk a little bit more about how friendship has gotten you into activism, sustained you in activism, but then also maybe on the flip side of that, also maybe if there's some other similarities, but maybe some differences, some things about the quote unquote older generation of activists that, we're okay maybe today leaving behind.
You want to talk about our friendship?
Well, gosh, do we start in middle school or? Yeah, goodness. Well, I feel really grateful Grace and so many things that she's taught me over the years and has invited me into that I wouldn't have, I think without our friendship, I wouldn't have, it would have taken me a lot longer to come to. And even, I mean, even things as early as in middle school, coming to like Episcopal youth events where I can see women priests, you know, and yeah, and like experience the depth of the church beyond the Catholic Church, and yeah, it just like really laid a foundation for a deep love of ecumenical kind of community making, and then getting into like our sort of politicization. I think so many moments. Grace and I were at the University of Virginia together for most of our college time, but she started out at Oberlin, this little liberal school in Ohio. And like, I can remember you talking about like gender neutral bathrooms or something, and that being like a really new idea to me. And like, oh, I'm gonna learn about pronouns. And like in, you know, the year 2000, whatever, 9, that was like, okay, here we are. And for like this Catholic, you know, young woman who had the kind of sex education that Catholic young women have, right? Yeah, like it was really important for me to be friends with a person of deep faith who held and sort of had access to different ways of understanding what it meant to be a person of faith, that weren't so constrained by the sort of like purity culture stuff that I had really internalized. And then into like our post-college years, and living in community became really important to both of us. And Grace started this intentional community that we lived at with Eric Martin. Yeah, gosh, like Charis, this community, which we can talk about more, sort of changed my whole life, I would say. So yeah, there are probably a million other examples, but I feel like I wouldn't be who I am without Grace.
Yeah, same, obviously. And when I think about the Dan gang, it's so obvious that it was just like such an iron sharpens iron kind of situation. And I think I see that so much in my friendship with Claire, just starting, and like politically too, starting from like middle school, when it was like cool to bring your lunch in a paper bag. And me and Claire decided like, I think actually I think it was probably you that had the idea first. You were like, that just means that you're throwing away a paper bag every day. So we like began to be the lunchbox brigade, and we're like really militantly like lunch boxes.
This is very important.
I mean, you know, 6th grade, we were doing what we could. And then, you know, to like canvassing for President Obama, like every day after senior year of high school, and feeling for the first time, like, oh my gosh, this is what it's like to be a part of something that, you know, our opinions of President Obama now aside, but this is what it feels like to be a part of something that's like collective change for good. I had the opportunity to go to Palestine after we graduated, and I came back and I was like, Claire, shit, it's not all recycling and voting for Obama. Like, like our government is really messed up. We need to talk. And I think like the way that our culture so privileges like romantic partnership, to have a like friendship that is a partnership for years, and to be able to like grow in the same way, you know. I mean, we were dweeby Harry Potter nerds 20 years ago, and we're still dweeby Harry Potter nerds, but to, you know, grow politically in the same direction was it's a practice to keep turning towards each other. And I see that so much in those guys, and the previous generation, just this like testing of ideas, and like, and also just like, you know, when the protests at Standing Rock happened, for example, to just always have a buddy to be like, yeah, I think we should go to that. Like, I'm pretty sure God's calling me to be there. What about you? And then to kind of be like, yeah, I think we should go, and to drive our little Prius 14 or 18 hours across the country, you know? So, and it's kind of like spiritual accompaniment, I think, that was very much modeled for us by the gang. I don't know what else to call them, the Dan gang.
Did we answer the question?
Yes. Just for everybody's own edification, last week, Colleen and Grace and Claire and I met in a preparatory meeting for this, and there were at least 3 things that you were talking about that I really wanted to get back to today. The first of them is you had mentioned then a relationship between truth and effectiveness in activism. And I'd love to hear you say some more about that, because I think that's something that was another potential similarity between the generations of activists here.
Let me start on this one. I want to be in conversation about this, and I want to hear what other folks have to think or have to say, especially folks who, you know, have the richness of knowing these guys in person. And I think, you know, in my political development in where I am right now, I work at a base building organization that mobilizes majority white communities to join fights, multiracial fights for racial and economic justice. It's called Showing Up for Racial Justice. And being a part of like campaign work, where we work with poor and working class communities in the South to win renters' rights or build tenants unions or, you know, fight for universal healthcare kind of things. In my returning to, you know, building my relationship with Dan and others in that era, I'm so struck by this distinction they make between being faithful or right and being effective. Claire helped me look up this Dorothy Day quote earlier today she said, "Don't worry about being effective, focus on being faithful to the truth." And when I hear that, I'm like, y'all don't want to win, like even a little bit, you know? And I think about also, it's interesting because we were also reflecting on how we were both raised, you know, in the 90s, and pretty much my whole life, I've known that the planet is doomed. And like that we're building towards this apocalypse and that it's like beyond saving. So I'm like, I understand about like this idea of winning, like, is it possible to save where we're going? Probably not ultimately. But I really want to win some stuff along the way. And I think I see so much of the liturgical actions, you know, and I think like it's one of those things where not everyone has to play every single role in movement work. And the work of the prophet maybe is to stand, you know, on the battlefield and like do the big liturgical action and like do exactly what you feel like God is calling you to do, or, you know, be as right in your politics as you can. And for me, right now, I want to move millions of people to the freedom side. And I think sometimes what that requires is meeting people where they're at and building networks of relationships. Not about being right necessarily. And, you know, you're always trying to move people to do the thing that you want them to do as an organizer. But letting people like believe that it is possible to change their material conditions. And I think about like, I don't know, the Montgomery bus boycott, and that wasn't just a liturgical action to be right. That was like 13 months of planned, sustained organizing that they had to bring people in, and then they won. And like what that feels like to actually like feel a small part of like the triumph. So yeah, the triumph of like moving the needle just a little bit or making a little bit more space. And yeah, so strategically I have a bone to pick with Dan, and one day when we're all in glory, I'm gonna be like, Dan, you didn't even want to win just a little bit. Yeah, but that's what I think a little bit about. I think that maybe differentiates how I see myself and like my political work from maybe the way that they were thinking about it. And maybe you can be faithful and win, or maybe, you know, you can be effective and be faithful.
Right. Yeah, like that seems like an important piece. Like, I think God wants 1 million people on the freedom side. I think God wants more than 1 million people, like everyone on the freedom side. And yeah, I think there's something about, there's a like almost its own sort of like purity culture among like radical leftist Christians that can, it can be kind of like exclusive and like, you know, it's, you're only doing enough if you're in jail or, you know, like you have to do the most radical self-sacrificial thing to, for it to count or something. Like that's what faithfulness looks like. And I think something that has been so important for me to learn as I just try to make sense of like, how do you engage in liberation struggles for the long haul is this idea of movement ecology, and that we need a diversity of tactics and a diversity of, you know, gifts and different communities acting in different ways out of their own strength and sense of, you know, what they're called to. And maybe Dan thought that way too. And it was just his particular call, and others to be the ones, you know, doing the big action and getting arrested. Yeah, I mean, I just think about like our a first training that Grace and I went to at the an action at Trump's inauguration, and we were learning about, you know, like if you're arrestable or non-arrestable and like maybe arrestable, and like we need people in each of these different roles, right? And I don't know, I was never in an action with Dan Berrigan, so I don't know how they approach those things. But yeah, I think, gosh, faithfulness and effectiveness. I think we were just also looking back at a quote from Thomas Merton's letter to a young activist that is included in Bill Wiley Kellerman's book. Hi, Bill Wiley Kellerman, thanks for your book. I remember reading that as a community, as Chorus community at some point, you know, thinking through like discerning as a community, like what is our role at this time in this place, and feeling like, how do we actually affect change? And I think I deeply value this particular spiritual discipline of like doing the thing, even if you can't see the effect that it's going to have. And that's like very much of my work with call to action, as we talk about like, how do we transform the Catholic Church, and how could we possibly be effective in doing that? And yeah, I think part of being faithful is like holding out that hope for like, we can actually create some change. And yeah, I think I wouldn't want to choose like the sort of purity of like doing the exact right thing, like making the exact right move over the opportunity to I don't know, yeah, like call in more people or something. So some thoughts on that.
Great, thank you so much. And just so everyone knows, in the chat box, Bill Wiley Kellerman brought up the Gandhian example there as well. So that's good for us to keep in mind. Though the one thing I was thinking of too is that it wasn't that effectiveness was completely absent from the older generation as well. I mean, just thinking about Catonsville and the other draft board actions that followed, because those files were not computerized. When those files were burned, they were lost. And so there was some effectiveness there as well. Thanks so much. I did want to circle back to the previous question, and both of you in that answer raised a couple of examples of differences between the generations. I just wanted to circle back to that and give you another chance to because I gave a long-winded question there, another chance to revisit that. Was there anything else from the older generation that you might be more willing to sort of leave aside now?
Yeah, thoughts on that? Gosh, well, I was thinking about, Claire and I were reflecting earlier today, and we were like, what are we even doing with our lives right now? And maybe this is more of a similarity, but I'm reminded of a quote that Eric shared with me once. You might help me, Eric. It's like Dan was writing to Phil, and he said, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm being led in the damnedest direction without any knowledge of where I'm going, except for the accompaniment of good friends, or something like that. Yeah. And so Claire and I were talking about how listless we are in this phase of our lives, and kind of feeling, I was moved by a quote from one of the poems that Dan wrote, I think the one about Vietnam, talking about between life as fool's pace and life as celebrant's flame, eons, and thinking about how, when I look back on that generation, it just seems like they were going so hard all the time for years and years. And we went pretty hard here in Charlottesville for a few years. And now I just find myself in such a period of like wanting to be like needing rest, and also just wanting my life to be a little bit less intense. And so I think I'm kind of in the time of life as fool's pace a bit. And like so much of the like powerful voices in organizing these days, I feel that are influencing me, are people who are talking about the radical power of rest, and rest as an anti-capitalist practice, and caring for yourself and caring for community, and going slow as an act of like radical, as a radical act. And something that I see is in just like the intensity and the urgency of those folks in the past. It feels hard to connect to, and it's just, I don't know, don't you feel like that? Like the culture of activists these days is talking about pumping the brakes, and maybe we're like preparing ourselves for, I feel in a time of preparation also right now. Like we burned ourselves out going really hard here in Charlottesville, and now there's like, feels like something that's coming next, and like, the apocalypse to prepare for. But that's one thing that I think about as a difference.
Yeah.
Or somebody tell me about how these men rested.
Yeah. Gosh. Yeah. Something I was struck by watching a documentary was just these like images or videos of Phil and Liz's kids coming to visit them in jail, and just feeling like this kind of gut wrenching, like, oh God, like, what a way to parent. And I don't have children yet, but like moving into the kind of life phase of like envisioning a family and what that will mean. And I often have thought about so priesthood and celibacy. And I remember sort of as a younger Catholic getting all of the explanations of like why there can only be male priests and why like priests have to be celibate. And I remember sort of, I don't know, a sense of like how beautiful that someone could sort of devote themselves entirely to the church as their family, and that there was a sense of like not having the distractions of family life or something. And that's I think my ideas about that have changed, and like what it means to like be a mother and an activist. And I know that, you know, many of that generation were parents and activists. And yeah, I'd be curious, you know, I mean, reading like The World Would Be Saved by Beauty and getting like the sort of this other angle on Dorothy Day and like what it meant to be Dorothy Day's daughter, Dorothy Day's granddaughter, sounded really hard. And yeah, I think I am longing for like a more integrated path that isn't so hell-bent on sort of this like martyrdom that doesn't allow for I don't know, engaging with these aspects of life that feel really important, that they have to go hand in hand with our work for change. It's not a fully fledged thought, but something like
Certainly
that.
a grappling.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That documentary, by the way, everybody, is called Devout and Dangerous. I highly recommend it to all of you if you get the chance to watch it. And I was thinking, as you both were speaking, of a scene from that where Phil was speaking to a crowd and imploring them, don't get tired, don't get tired. And it's like, I don't know, how do you do that? You know, and so I very much pick up what you're saying there. We have just a few minutes left in this part of the conversation, so I want to just get everybody tuned in for the next part, where I'm going to call on you to ask some questions. We already have a few in the chat box, but get the gears moving in your head to ask questions of Grace and Claire. But I want to just finish with this one because it's so interesting to me in our conversation. I'm forgetting which one of you brought it up, so you'll be able to pick it up. But you were citing the research of Alexia Salvatierra and Peter Heltzel, and the difference between faith-rooted organizing and faith-based organizing. And I just found that so interesting. I'm wondering if you could say a few more words about that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, faith-rooted versus faith-based organizing. It was probably understanding that distinction was part of the reason why I decided not to be a priest partway into seminary. Oops, sorry, Episcopal Church. Actually, I think the Episcopal Church I'm better able to better serve as a layperson. But Alexia Salvatierra makes this distinction between faith-rooted and faith-based, where in faith-based organizing, you're within the church and using church members as your base, like as the people you're trying to organize and move to take action. Whereas faith-rooted organizing is that you're doing your work in organizing, but your faith is the thing that is animating you to do it. And I think we get mixed up sometimes in the distinction between the two. And some people want to be doing faith-based work, and some people want to be are doing faith-based work, but really maybe are more called to do faith-rooted work. And I don't know, I think about that distinction in terms of Dan and their legacy and his legacy, that community's legacy. And it's like, you know, in all the ways that maybe I'm like, I don't know if I would do that way, or like, I don't necessarily see the actions that you took or the way you lived your life as like a carbon copy model of the way that I can live my life now. But what is like so obviously clear is that they were doing faith-rooted organizing, and had such a clear relationship to God and such a clear understanding of how their faith mattered in their lives, and then acted accordingly. And that's, you know, the way that my activism and organizing shows up is different than theirs, but that like our faith as the root of what we're doing it animates like all of the social change work that I do. And you're maybe more in the faith-based organizing
trying
work. Yeah,
over here trying.
Bless your
Tasha
heart.
and Angie. Yeah, gosh, I wish I had I wish all the regenerators, the participants in this program that I get to organize regeneration, are young people across the country who are deeply Catholic and deeply wrestling with what that means, and how that animates their work for change in society and specifically in the church. And that's something I'm curious about with Dan. I don't know too much about think I know that he was always getting in trouble with bishops and stuff. But I wonder if he had ideas about, you know, is it possible to change the Catholic Church, or is it just a matter of being the church in a different way? And that is a lot of what I feel like I've been doing, and connecting with people that are sort of acting in that way. And yeah, it sort of comes back to this, like, and I really want, like, if we could actually change the Catholic Church, how many people would that impact, you know? Yeah, so I don't know that it's effective, but here we are.
Well, great. Thank you so much for this rich conversation. I've already gone over my time for questions, so I want to turn it over to others. About maybe 25 minutes ago, April Boone asked this question in the chat to Claire. Could you say more about ritual leadership? I think that's a great point to pick up on.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah, when I think about, so I, as was said in my bio, I've been discerning priesthood for many years now. And I think the aspect of a priestly vocation that is so compelling to me is about ritual and sacrament, and these ways of marking and acknowledging how the sacred like dwells among us, and what it means to connect with the spirit in our material lives. And you know, the sacramental aspects of Catholicism have always been, you know, things that really speak to me. And it seems ridiculous to me that there are only 7 sacraments. Like, there are infinite sacraments, I say. Call me a heretic. So Grace and I and other friends got to take a little class with this woman I mentioned before, Retta, and she called it emergent ritual for change makers or something like that. And it was just, yeah, really powerful and beautiful to be invited to just be deeply attuned to a moment where a ritual could do something and shift the energy or the sense of possibility, or, you know, extend comfort or meaning making in some way, that we have that sort of capacity at any moment, and particularly in the context of activism and protest. And I think all the time about one of like the deep learnings from Standing Rock being this sort of mantra that like our protest is prayer, our prayer is protest, and that those, and I think that's something like Dan said in his own way too. Yeah, so I'm curious about, you know, what it means to live into a priestly vocation without the, you know, the sort of status of the stamp of approval from the bishop or the Vatican, but in a way that engages the world sacramentally. I don't know if that was an answer to your question, but there you go.
I think we're an intimate enough group here so that people could just unmute themselves and ask away if you like. Anybody, any takers want to jump in here?
You got any questions here?
Yes, but I'm gonna give them a chance first. Should I just go?
Go for it, Eric.
Okay, I have a question. I mean, given that we're in Charlottesville, and part of the reason, hello everybody.
Yeah, come on. Is he on the screen?
Given that we're in, I can't tell. Given that we're in Charlottesville, and that's part of the reason you're here, is the work that's been done here. I'm curious. You spoke briefly, Grace, about Caris, the community, or I can't remember which one of you, but at Grace and Claire are kind of like a core part of the spiritual and practical center of like the functioning of this community of Charis. And it all happened during 8/12, like the Summer of Hate, Unite the Right. And I'm curious if you would, how much you would want to share about like how did you discern how to respond as a faith-rooted and faith-based, and like you were approaching from your various angles, like how to approach neo-Nazis and the alt-right and neo-Confederates and the KKK, like a very urgent thing. How did you create community, which is a very beautiful community that sustained a lot of people through a lot of trauma, and not just people in the community, but a-religious or anti-religious activists in town as well. How did you go about that? There's no time for that, but I wonder if you could give us a snippet of
that. Yes. So as you may remember, Charlottesville was the center of attention for a while in the news. But for us, it was much longer here when 700 white supremacists, white nationalists marched on our town to protect the Robert E. Lee statue that a 15-year-old young Black woman had proposed be removed because she thought it was racist. And yeah, oh gosh, how to not just tell the whole story of Charis. Several years before, I'm not Catholic, as I said, but I think I'm like Catholic adjacent enough that I had been influenced by the Catholic worker movement, and a Episcopal priest here had called me and said that there was a unused Episcopal church building, that's like charming 120-year-old church, and then a small vicarage. And he wanted me to ask me if I wanted to start a farm there, which is ridiculous because I don't like manual labor and I'm not a farmer. And it's like in the middle of the woods. But I said, it sounds like what you have is an intentional community. And I don't know, fast forwarding through lots of gnashing of teeth and wondering what I was doing. It wasn't really anything that I did. It was just, I feel like I created the space and God filled the space. And for a long time, I tried to not like sell the idea. I didn't want it to be like, come on down to Grace's Disneyland Christian intentional community where we will have chickens and morning prayer. But really trying to let it function like a garden, or what I know of how plants grow, which is you sow the seeds and then you kind of let the magic happen. So that community was brewing for a few years, and I think like people, all of our little freaky queer friends in Charlottesville who were friends with me and were kind of like, you're a Christian and you live in a Christian commune, okay, and eventually started coming over because it was beautiful, and we would have potlucks and parties and invite people there, and the purpose of this community was, I don't know, it was just this thing that felt like it was flowing out of all of us and we needed to do to tend the space in the right way. And the church also was really severely subsidizing the rent, which meant that the rest of people who lived there could do hospitality work and activism in the community. But then by the time the summer of 2017 happened, I sort of looked around and realized like, oh my gosh, we have been gestating a community space that our community desperately needs right now, and we didn't even know that we needed it. And it functioned sort of as this like little boat that like carried us through that summer. It's far off. It's like 10 minutes from Charlottesville, so not too far, but it has a single driveway. So we could have someone sit at the end of the driveway and watch to make sure that like no white supremacists were coming and infiltrating our meetings. There was lots of parking so cars could come. It was a very like private place to meet, and it was beautiful. And just so much of the resistance that happened in Charlottesville was incubated in this Christian community. Like all these little, punky anarchists were growing up to the intentional community where there was like a Psalms quoted on the wall, and they were like, where am I? And you were like, don't worry, you'll get it eventually. Yeah. And if that quote about being led in the damnedest direction without knowledge of good friends or anything but good friends, that was definitely that summer. And yeah, that's what I'll say about that.
Who wants to jump in next?
okay, maybe I'll go. So you were getting at this a little bit, I think, in your story about that summer in this intentional community, but I feel like one of the differences, and this could totally be my lack of knowledge of history showing, but I feel like one of the differences between the Dan Gang generation and our generation now is that there was probably more sympathy to religion, even maybe among people who were more radical. And I'm curious, how you think that faith-based organizing might be different now that people are maybe a little bit less religious, especially young people. It's not like I don't find a lot of hostility, but there are certainly people, like Eric said, who are like a-religious or anti-religious or somewhere on that spectrum. And yeah, I don't know, maybe this also speaks to what you were saying about being able to draw people in, but maybe you could just ruminate on that for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I think so many people of our generation have been so deeply harmed by various religious traditions. I feel keenly aware of how many people around our age who are raised Catholic are like, just, yeah, have been so hurt. But definitely in other Christian denominations as well. And at the same time, this is maybe a roundabout way of answering your question, but Grace and I both, like in many recent conversations, have like connected with people who are in activism and organizing and work for social change, who don't have a sense of a spiritual grounding or tradition or home, and who like really yearn for that. And yeah, so I guess it's sort of both things. Like many people of our generation have really given up on what they found to be a like super harmful, thing, the Christian church. And many people of our generation are really longing for a tradition to claim as their own. And yeah, I mean, I think those of us who are born into and like continue to feel some sense of belonging to, or like responsibility to a Christian faith, like really have to do the reckoning of how messed up this tradition is in so many ways. And I think maybe it's in like getting real about that, and like doing that hard like truth telling, that it can, I don't know, that something can be salvaged that can be of use or of benefit to people that weren't born into this and are like longing for spiritual roots. Yeah, you go.
No, I think that I totally agree. I also think that it's like finally not so terrible to identify as Christian, to identify as a Christian in like queer spaces or in like more lefty young people spaces. I like have been astounded in the last like couple of years. So many of my queer friends have been like, I was raised Presbyterian and I know you're still Christian. Why? And like, tell me about that. And I've been like, I've been waiting for this. But I honestly think, at least in my circles, a lot of it's influenced by the real strong presence of like young Jewish people being really public about their faith and organizing and like rooting their organizing in their Jewish identity and Jewish faith. That's just, probably always been happening, but like is really prevalent. Especially in groups that work for Palestinian liberation. And I just have a lot of friends who are like, I just went to Shabbat with my Jewish friends, and like, I want that. And is that possible? is it possible for me to like reclaim the Christianity that I was raised in? And I'm like, come on down. We've been laboring at it for a while. And even like Christian language in some ways, there's this like famous now, I guess like niche famous progressive leftist thinker, Adrienne Marie Brown, who has a bunch of podcasts. And a few months ago, she was talking to someone and she was like, you know what word I've been thinking a lot about lately that just is so like interesting to me? Discernment. And I was like, oh, wow. Like now even the cool Black radicals are using our language. Like clearly Christianity is not canceled completely yet. And she was not talking about it in a Christian context, but I was like, I know a thing or two about discernment. So yeah, I mean, to get through these times that we're in, like, I mean, it is like a soul wrecking time to live. And people need spiritual practices and need like an anchor, I think. And I'm feeling blessed to use some of my like traditions resources to help connect with friends.
I'm curious just to follow that for a moment, especially from where you live geographically. I think you probably encounter other Christians totally different. Yeah, okay, you get where that's going. How does that affected you, or how do you interact or respond or whatever fits there? I don't know. I live in New York, so it's less of an issue because I don't want it to be.
Oh gosh. You know, what do I want to say about that? The other Christians. I think like I have been inspired lately by people who see possibilities for openings in organizing evangelical and like evangelical Christians, or like, you know, more conservative Christians. I think there are the kind of people who are so like hunkered down that, you know, that's not the kind of person that I'm going to be putting my energy towards. But I heard about a project recently where it was people who were, it was an immigrant rights organization in West Virginia that was targeting conservative Christian women using the biblical, you know, talking about welcoming the stranger. And they were building this base of Christian women who were secretively receiving their emails, or like they had like Facebook pages that were like fronts for their education material about why the Bible talks about immigration as being a good thing. But they had like had these thoughts in their mind, but they weren't a part of a community where they could voice that kind of they could like voice safely those opinions. And they were just these hundreds of women that were like reading these emails being like, yeah, perhaps when they said welcome the stranger, like they actually mean that. So, you know, I'm queer. It's not my favorite thing to be engaging with people who think that you know, whatever, I'm like my life is living in sin. And in my personal experience with like conservative evangelical Christians, the actual practitioners are a lot less hardline than the like theology, than like the, you know, Liberty University kind of, or just the like the party line sort of. And I don't know, I still believe that there's a way to appeal to like their moral values and senses of compassion to like move them in certain directions. And then there's some people who are just, you know, maybe a little bit beyond the pale, and you just have to not engage. And honestly, I will say too, Claire and I participated in high school in this like parachurch conservative youth group called Young Life that probably some of you are familiar with. And for like all the damage that it does and did, I will also say that like I talk about my relationship with Jesus in the way that I do because of like the conservative monopoly on that like Christian experience, or my own liberal church's unwillingness to you know, make a bold enough claim about like God or Jesus, or put me through formation that, or they were too afraid, I think, of like being conservative or scaring people away, or, you know, maybe it's just like not what we do as Episcopalians. So I do feel, I don't know, grateful in a complicated way to some of the conservative Christian kind of ways of practicing faith.
I would not have read the Bible as a Catholic if not for Young Life until divinity school.
April has her hand up, please.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to mention this because it just keeps repeating in my mind as you were talking. When I was a young person and Dan had come to say Mass at an intentional community I was in at Covenant House. But anyway, I forget the gospel, but there he was in vestments and he gets up to say his homily and he says, well, we know Jesus couldn't have meant that. And he sat back down. And that was the whole homily. And so I think to myself, how bold and brave he was to just use his creative personality and inspiration. And I just want to say the church is always in crisis. And I agree with you so much, like it seems like so heavy, but I keep reminding myself the church is always in crisis. And Dan being that inspiration of just like using humor and irony and to move through these hard things. I just wanted to offer that.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Totally.
Anyone else want to jump in? Claire and Grace, any final thoughts that you had?
We got a song.
Oh, we have a song.
Oh, please.
All right.
Okay. Well, this is another one that I learned from Ched and Elaine, and learned after I heard them sing it that it comes from the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. And so it's a really powerful song. One of the things our ritual teacher taught us or said was that revolution is a vibration, and the vibration of revolution is in song. That's something I think about a lot. And yeah, just how we, how the vibrations of Daniel Berrigan's songs and his community like continues to move through us, all of us on this call. And yeah, that we can somehow tap into that and keep moving together as movement. So feel free to sing along. It's a little call and response. This also feels like a song that I'll always associate with our community chorus and our community here in Charlottesville more broadly, and resistance to white supremacy. Courage, courage, my friends, you do not walk alone. We will walk with you and sing your spirit home. Courage, courage, my friend, you do not walk alone. We will walk with you and sing your spirit home. Courage, courage, my friend, you do not walk alone. We will walk with you and sing your spirit home. Amen.
Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody here. I just want to thank you once again for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us. And please keep your eyes peeled to our website, berrigancollective.org, for upcoming events in the future and publications that we'll have, and also on social media, on Facebook and Instagram. So thanks so much for being with us tonight, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you down the line. And especially thanks to Claire and Grace.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
So beautiful. Thanks, guys.
Did Bill and Sue already leave?
Yeah, I think. Well, I can't tell. On video if they're
Hey, Bill, good to see you. Thanks for joining.
If he's trying to